it's actually harder to get to 100,000 than it is from $100,000 to $1 million.
That's a pretty big jump for a lot of people.
The game is the game of value.
How do I get there?
A lot of people ask the wrong question. If people think they have a money problem, it's never actually a money problem.
Like, who's worth adding value to?
It's those that you do the most for that betray you in the end. You have to do an audit that you ask, do I have relationships that are subtractive relationships, additive relationships, or multiplier relationships?
You feel like you're at the top of the amount of effort that you can put in. How do you then 10x it?
Okay, and this is the future.
Okay, I'm not a millionaire. If I want to get to be a millionaire,
Look, your first million, often it'll test you. Probably more emotionally than financially. But you can do it without selling your soul. You can actually enjoy the ride.
how do I get there?
One of the things that happens when you're trying to get to your first million and you're just starting out, if you're really at zero, you're trying to get the 1 million mark, it's actually harder to get to 100,000 than it is from $100,000 to $1 million.
Gotcha.
And part of the reason is that you have to develop your mental capital and your relationship capital. I think there's probably 6 or 7 steps to do it. Number one is you just got to build really useful, bankable skills. Second is you've just got to get in the game and progress over perfection and actually, create validation of value creation. Then you've just got to get proximity to people that are playing a bigger game, that are inspiring, that build you up, that help you grow. When I was a teenager, I went to this thing called the Governor's Honors Academy. I got to hear from scientists, senators, but what was really important is I got to hear from entrepreneurs. And a rancher that owned a ton of property and did a lot of agriculture and was really wealthy, and one of the school buildings was named after him. I remember I went up to him and asked him questions. And I said, what would you recommend for someone young? And he said, what I'd recommend is don't go out there and try to get something from someone. Start by giving something to somebody. He goes, there's people all the time that know I have money and they want to get something from me. He says, but the people that have gotten wealthy around me showed up in giving, and I taught them. And a lot of times they were doing it as an internship or they were doing it for scraps. But the thing is, the education was so valuable. So I took that to heart. And the game is the game of value. Mm. The problem is a lot of people get stuck in the consumer condition. And a consumer condition is always looking to take more than they give. And so you can feel it. You can sense it. It's almost like there's a scent to it, and it's repelling. And so when people are always takers, then they're never really going to get that far ahead because they really destroy relationship capital. So when I think about relationship capital, I think of it like an account, right? Now, if I open up a bank account today, I have to put money in that account, right?
Yeah.
Before I can take a withdrawal. So the money in this world that we're talking is value. So you make value deposits. How can you add value to someone? Early on, maybe someone doesn't have a lot of confidence, right? Maybe that's not there yet. Maybe because they're starting over. Or maybe they don't just have very much money. Maybe those two things are lacking. When you have less money, then you have to contribute your time.
Yeah.
It's like there's a lot of wealthy people that become philanthropists because they can donate a lot of money. That's a very tax efficient thing for them to do. Mm-hmm. But donating their time is a lot harder for them, right? But for other people that don't have a lot of money, what they could donate is their time. And in exchange, they can learn. And here's the thing. A lot of people ask the wrong question. This is a question people ask all the time. How can I create value? Now, that's fine to ask yourself. But if you go ask someone else, how can I create value? The onus is now on them to think of something.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, you're offloading it to them.
Right. So I would call this is really shallow. Every time I open my calendar, it says better questions equals better life. That's like a permanent banner in everywhere in my calendar. And especially in today's AI world, if you can ask better questions, you get better prompts, you start to get better answers.
Yeah.
And so the better questions might be, hey, what are you excited about? What are you up to? What's working for you? What's not working for you? What's your biggest opportunity? What's your biggest obstacle? Is there anywhere where if you had additional support, it would be a relief for you?
And you're looking for ways to provide value to that person through those answers.
I still do that to this day when I'm talking to someone.
Yeah.
I just always ask these questions in my own head. Can I help? And if I can't, who do I know that can? So if it's not me, who else do I know? And I'm willing to tap into that relationship capital, especially when it's like people that are showing up and contributing.
And it's like you don't have to be the one to provide the service per se, but the connection adds value.
Right.
And I don't want this to sound wrong, but it's like, who's worth adding value to? Because I think there are some people who don't reciprocate value, right?
Oh, totally. I mean, the book that changed my life so much on this was Give and Take by Adam Grant. Phenomenal book, because I've been in a place in my life where I realize I'm giving and someone's taking, and what I'm doing is I'm draining my own energy, and it's creating it's enabling and creating entitlement.
Yeah.
There's a lack of appreciation. You might have heard the saying, it's those that you do the most for that betray you in the end.
Yeah.
You know, and it's because they're just so used to, you're not actually helping them, you're harming them. And so sometimes it's hard to just say no. I have someone right now that I've really been trying to help out. I brought him up to the cabin for a couple days. He's been a great relationship in my life and been a contributor. The past, he's in a really bad spot. And like, eventually I just had to tell him the truth. Like, hey man, I'm trying to help you out. But as I'm helping him, I found out that he's drained relationship capital with some of these other relationships, and he's just been in a bad place, and he's been so isolated. So where someone's maybe later on in their life and they're not where they want to be, they have to do an audit. And they have to say, do I have relationships that are subtractive relationships, additive relationships, or multiplier relationships? So these people that are in scarcity are often subtractors, the naysayers, the people that undermine your confidence, the people that talk but don't do. There's those people that are in their life. Maybe their family, maybe their friends, maybe their business cohorts. Now there's additives, right? They might bring value, but there might be a limitation. But then there's the multipliers. The multipliers are always promoting you. They're always giving you good advice, whether you want to hear it or not.
Yeah.
They're always making these amazing connections, or they're great collaborators. And the thing is, all it takes is a few multiplier relationships. I call that the catalyst in Money Unmasked, my book, Money Unmasked. It's the catalyst relationships. They think and play big, and they show us ways to win together. And if instead we think they're a catalyst, but they're actually a high roller, so they're in this world of pretend. They spend more than they can actually afford, and it puts them in a cash flow crunch. And then they're always showing up in a level of scarcity or panic. And then all of a sudden their mess becomes your mess because you're in a relationship with them. This is what leads to a lot of damage. And this happens a lot of times. People have the wrong employees, right? So you've got to be around people that catalyze. And if you're young, you just add value to them.
Yeah. So how do you take the momentum? Because it's like, I think for myself, getting up to that 100,000, it takes a lot of work. And then it's like, you feel like you're at the top of the amount of effort that you can put in. How do you then 10X it?
You have all that mental capital. You have all that relationship capital. You have all that momentum. It's like, you know more. You had to start from nothing, coal miner's son, didn't have a ton of money, but I had ambition. I had a willingness to learn. I was inquisitive. I was curious. I was always looking to invest in myself and to grow those skills. I was willing to go out and have, the difficult conversations, because it's hard to approach someone and say, hey, I just did the work. It's just like when I was wanting to do comedy. I was like, well, who's good at comedy? Who can I work on jokes with? Like, I'm always looking at this co-creation model.
So you're saying it's more about what you develop along the pathway towards 100,000, keeping with that will lead you to that million. You learn.
It's just a different way of handling sales. I mean, I have to sell my team on our vision now. I'm selling, I'm not selling one-on-one with someone.
Gotcha.
Even when I write a book, I'm selling people on the philosophy. I learn the skills of sales that apply to all aspects of life. I sold my wife on marrying me. There's so many things you sell people on. And if you don't learn those skills, then you don't ask for what you want. You don't know how to frame those things. And the world happens through sales.
If I'm understanding correctly, it's like what took you alone to get to 100,000, you can now get 10 other people to sell more or less, and that gets you to $1 million.
Yeah, because basically I sell my business in 2021, right? I end that relationship completely in 2023 with licensing deals and everything. But then from, 2024 to where we're at today in 2025, in 1 year, I've basically created more than $100K per month in recurring revenue. That came because I now had certain frameworks. I had relationships. I had knowledge. I was able to do that because of everything I'd learned before. But that was harder to get to 100,000 total when I was in college. I remember, my second year in business was 1999, and I got to $96,000 that year, mainly selling life insurance.
Yeah.
And that was really hard work. I'm meeting with everyone and anyone I can.
Yeah.
And, people that worked with my dad, people that worked with my mom, the parents of my friends. And it was stressful. I was nervous. I remember my roommate, Larry, he had a dad that ran a construction company and a mom that was a banker. And they were pretty wealthy in my mind. And they were meeting with, this is crazy, 5 financial advisors. I was one. I'm a kid. I'm young, maybe I was 20 years old at that point. But I had learned, because I went to different courses, that this guy Vince told me, go to Landmark. You're going to learn how to communicate better. Even though it was an ontological process about thinking and creating possibility, it allowed me to ask better questions. It allowed me to be more confident. I was just constantly going to things to improve who I could be as a human being. And so I gave them a strategy so the other 4 people didn't listen to them. What they told me was, they would love to have a motorhome, and they plan on buying it in a few years. Well, I said, what if we could get it now? So the first thing I did was I saved them tax. The second thing I did was help them restructure loans. The restructure of their loans and the saving of tax, that freed up about $2,500 a month. So we're easily able to take half of that.
And they financed.
And they got their motorhome.
Oh, okay.
Right? And now they're enjoying their motorhome. They still have an extra $1,250 a month above what they had before. Everyone else is just talking about retirement plans and paying off their mortgage and pretty standard asset allocation stuff. And I was like, well, what do you want? What's important to you? And they're like, I can't believe we're going with you. That's what they said. We met with you because Larry just told us to meet with you, and he's your friend, and this is just a courtesy.
Yeah, yeah. And you're 20 at this time?
20 years old. Yep, still in college. But again, I didn't just show up like knowing all the answers. I showed up asking a ton of questions in the first meeting, understanding what they wanted, and said, if I could help you get there and still save more money, would you want that? They said yes. They set up another meeting. I went to my mentors. I called this guy Trent. I'm like, this is what I'm thinking. What if they did this, this, and this, and this, this, and this? And he goes, you can actually pay LEAP, L-E-A-P, Lifetime Economic Acceleration Process. You could pay them to design this case. So I paid him $1,000. And they went through everything, and they gave me all of the strategy. And then I sat down with them. It was all beautifully presented, and I showed it to them and walked through it. And they became my client. And, Larry's dad died 3 years later of a sudden heart attack. So he got to enjoy 3 years of something that they didn't plan on buying for like 5.
Jeez.
So I just, that was a skill set that I wasn't born with. It's just that I was willing to learn.
So I want to go back to the $1,000 that you paid to Leap, because you paid for that money out of your own pocket.
Right. And I didn't know if I was going to get it back for sure or not.
Yeah. And I wanted to explore that. Like, what was the mindset behind that? Because I feel like that's a pretty big jump for a lot of people.
Well, the mindset was, even if I didn't make this person a client, I got all of the details of how they would present this in all the different places. So I now had this stack of papers that talked about, here's the strategy and why we would recommend this and what it does. And I could just study that.
And you could use that on other people.
Yeah. I mean, it was about this one person's situation specifically, but it would obviously apply to different people.
Gotcha.
And it worked fantastically.
Oh, okay.
It really did. And so I don't know if a lot of people did that or normally paid that. I mean, I went to so many other things that, I just started to get to know everybody. And again, they would come up and talk to me, tell me what they were up to. And I wouldn't just keep it at small talk. I'd be like, any new strategies you've done, or any really cool, exciting cases you've been working on, or, any new insights that you've had. I was constantly getting deeper with them.
Interesting. You asked the right questions. You figured out what they wanted. and you were in the weeds enough about the details of the program that you could offer them something that appealed to them.
I learned how to solve problems.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have the solution, I found other people that did. I went to the attorney and talked to him. You know, I went to the other people that were the best known in the firm, that were the smartest ones. When someone came to present, I tried to take them out to lunch if they'd go to lunch and pay for lunch. I would just do things that would put me in a situation to have accelerated learning. And this is the thing, as you make a commitment where you're like, all right, this is my vision. The hard thing is, if you're not where you want to be, often that vision is pretty selfish. It's usually very goal-oriented, like, here's what I want, here's the money, the revenue, the acknowledgement, like all that kind of stuff, right? So it's not often about service. It's not often about like solving anyone else's problems. It's not really about value creation. It's more about like getting something.
Yeah,
right? And when you can make that shift, instead of what you get to how much you can give, that's transformative. Because the people that make the most create the most value. And in order to create the most value, you have to become a value creator. To become a value creator, you have to have something that's compelling enough that you want to do, not just that you have to do. And a lot of times it does take hard work to get there. It does take doing some reading sometimes, or taking a trip to learn something, or, you know, being an intern for a while, or whatever that might be. It's, you just simply have to be patient and persistent. Patient so that you're not shortchanging yourself, just jumping to something that's going to be an immediate payoff, but is time for money, and there's no scale to it, or there's no leverage, or there's no there's nothing exponential. So sometimes you have to say no to money in order to have a lot more in the future. And say, is this developing the life that I want? Is this energy draining or energy giving? Is this something that I'm learning from and that I could grow from, or is it just something that's a one-time transaction? It's just like, you have to think more of a big picture there.
I think sometimes value is a hard topic to understand. How would you describe value? Like, what does that actually mean? The person, the wealthiest people add the most value. It's like, how does that work with like an Elon Musk or a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs?
Yeah, it's perspective. Value's perspective, okay? So, look, most people are kind of trapped in this frame or this box, where they think value is effort. So they work, but it's very low leverage. They do the work and they get paid. But think about writing a book. There's a lot of work, and there's a lot of work, and there's even more work. There's maybe even investing money. And then eventually you get paid. It takes time to develop. And a lot of people, they're just not patient enough to develop something because they want that now. They want too immediate of a payoff. Like, you look at like Jerry Seinfeld, one of the most successful comedians that's ever lived. He was obsessive. Him and Larry David talked about how much time they invested in creating episodes for Seinfeld. And they did it out of a love, out of an enjoyment, out of an ethic, before there was ever a big payoff.
Yeah.
You see so many people that now are really wealthy. They did so much work before they became wealthy. And when you're talking about guys like Elon or other, it's like the way that he does it is he just builds such a bigger container. It's such a bigger vision. And he has other people that support that vision. But he casts the vision, and then the talent shows up because that vision is meaningful. It's appealing. And he gets people to do things that seemed impossible, but it's because they're bought in, whether it's spaceships, or whether it's the future of cars, or whether it's, the internet that we're using right now with Starlink. It's like, it's a completely big vision that goes beyond what one individual could ever achieve. And see, when people are struggling, they might get out of that struggle initially with goals. They might see some growth. But goals are usually personal Where vision is so much more expansive. It's so much more about what it can do for everyone else, and it's beyond one person's current reach. It allows other people's abilities to support you as well. And it's those that create the biggest vision that make the biggest difference, and vision is what determines the value that's created, and dollars follow value. So if we think that time is how we create money, because you hear the notion time is money, well, the thing is, it's actually vision that creates the biggest dollars. But that's why we go back to the very beginning. I'm like, you have to act upon that vision. Otherwise, it's only a dream.
So let's...
And dreams are just stories.
Gotcha.
Until they turn to value.
So now I've got my 100,000. How do I now take it from 100,000 to what you say is the easy part, to $1 million?
Yeah, because from 0 to 100, we might not have a lot of relationship capital. We might not have as much mental capital. But as we develop confidence, as we develop those skills, it's easier to get to the 1 million from 100,000, because now we have something. Now we've developed something. Now we've got a skill.
So I think along the idea of value, so let's take, like someone doing your landscaping, right? They're doing a great job. They're adding value to it. It's not that they're bad at what they're doing, but so what's the difference between that and a Bill Gates?
Such low leverage. It's physical over like mental, right? It's very one-on-one. Like even my book is one to many, right?
Oh,
I can have things, I could be asleep and people are buying a book.
Gotcha.
I could be on vacation and people are reading the book.
Yeah, versus
thousands of people could be reading it at the same time.
Gotcha. Versus a laborer, you have to be awake offering that labor.
Right. So it's kind of like someone that wants to sell insurance. Like I started selling insurance. Okay. And initially my goal was to be the top agent in the agency.
Yeah.
Right. So that's just me. And that's just a goal. Then one day I woke up and I said, what would it take to fill up 5 agents' calendars? And it was a different thought process.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's like these, like 1-800-INSURANCE or, there's people that invent systems for a lot of people to work in that system to provide that value. When you're just one person in the system, you're going to limit your upside. When you invent the system or create a radically different system that's disruptive and has a lot more leverage, think about that. Like that's why a lot of venture capitalists, they don't invest in manufacturing because it's location dependent, human labor. But you know what they will? They will invest in software.
Yeah, technology.
Because that could be all over the planet and it could have millions of users instead of just the one person getting the one output.
Yeah. That's interesting, and correct me if this thought process is wrong, but Mike Rowe often says that you'd be surprised to know the number of plumbers that are millionaires. And he's talking about not an individual plumber, but a plumber who fills the schedules for other plumbers, right?
Right. Look, when I was at that Governor's Honors Academy that I talked about, there was someone I became friends with there, and his dad had a house that crawled up the mountain. It was like 8 stories, right? Because here's the mountain, and there's like all these different. I was like, what does he do? He's like, he's a CPA. I was like, damn, CPAs make that kind of money? So when I met his dad, pull out the red memo pad, and guess what? He's like, well, I own a CPA firm.
Oh.
We have a bunch of CPAs that work for us.
Yeah.
We're nationwide.
It's like, oh, okay. So it's not that he's a CPA. Yeah. Right. So that's the same concept of he probably got to his 100,000 being a CPA, and then he got other people.
He created the container versus being limited in the container.
Man. And it's such an interesting model because it's not, I feel like as we scroll through the
Guess
internet,
what he had to be good at, by the way? He had to sell people on coming to be at the firm.
Yeah.
Why would people work for him?
Yeah. But he was passionate about it, I would assume.
Right. So it's like, I look at the people that work within my firm that are so passionate about enrolling people into our program because they know the impact. They were products of the product. Mike, who's one of our main enrollment guys, he read my book in 2017. He gave it to his family members. We stayed in touch. He's like such a believer
Yeah.
He's an advocate. He like breathes it. He loves it, right? Mm-hmm. That's why you hear so much about culture. That's why I'm like, man, just go work for an amazing company when you're young and be in the upside potential game.
Yeah.
How can you contribute to the bottom line? Well, guess what? Sales is really easy to see because most people aren't just totally salaried. There's plenty of bonuses. There's plenty of upside potential. So now you actually get to learn about responsibility. Now you get to learn about increased skills paying off where, you know, I have a lot of, you know, my wife was a teacher, my sister, teacher of the year, my mother-in-law, a teacher. I mean, there's so many teachers in our family, but no matter how great they are, they get a salary. And the only way they increase their salary is by getting a master's or going into management, right? Like my sister became a vice principal. So it's very time for money, but I'm an educator. It's just that I can educate here on YouTube. I can educate in my books. I can educate on courses, and people could be going through that when I'm not even around.
Yeah. Well, and it's an interesting philosophy because, you know, I feel like a lot of when you look at people's advice on getting to 1 million on YouTube or TikTok and stuff, it's all about an individual more or less taking advantage of other individuals versus what you're talking about is an individual creating a way for other individuals to make money. And that's how money is made, you know, in multiples across
That's
the whole.
how I got there pretty quick, right? I learned, but I also made people money while I learned from them.
Yeah.
So I could, you know, obviously, like, you know, I talked about early on in my life, I did Landmark, but that was, you know, like $1,000 or less. I did Strategic Coach. That was a little bit more. That was probably like 7,500 to 15,000. You know, I did Genius Network. You know, I did all these things. You know, there was those. I'm just paying to get access to that information. But with the financial people, I brought them opportunity, and I learned, and we both got paid.
Yeah.
So it's like, what do they want? I just learned, you know, I remember I sat down with Dan Sullivan for the first time. I really wanted to get to know him. And I met him in a bathroom in Chicago. He was teaching Coach 2. I was in Coach 1. And I run into him. I'd heard his voice by listening to so many audios. And he just said, hey, I'd love to get to know you. He's like, oh, come over and have lunch with me. I walk in. He's surrounded by people. So I was like, well, I'm not going to really get a chance to have lunch with him because the break's almost over and everybody's talking to him. So I just called the office. I said, hey, when I come next time, is Coach 2 going to be happening? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, Dan and I were going to try to have lunch, but that didn't work out. Is there any way if I came a day early that we could have lunch or dinner? And they're like, we'll get a hold of him. We'll let you know. I said, yeah. And so as soon as I sat down with him, what I want to figure out is what is his currency?
Yeah.
Because he had impacted me and I wanted to get to know him. I learned really quick his number one currency was referrals. He was talking about this referral tree software they used and whose biggest referrer Joe Polish was and all this. And I was like, wonder what it would take for me to get there. So I thought about it and I called afterwards. I said, hey, I host this event. We usually have like 150, 200 people there every month. It's called the Producer Forum. What if one time we just had one of the Strategic Coach people come and teach? Boom, they taught. They got a bunch of people in the program because I loved it, endorsed it. And it's like all of a sudden, I became really close with him and Babs, his wife, who ran the organization, because I was giving referrals. So I got more personal attention than other people did because I understood what was valuable to him and offered it. That's the game. Find out what's valuable to someone and just help them, serve them, support them. Don't just ask, but also give. Yeah.
So did you find out what his currency was by listening to what he talked about most? Yeah. Is that what it was?
It was Les and I were in the, you know, my business partner at the time. We're just sitting there having lunch and start getting to know him.
And he just kept talking about referrals.
Yeah, I just talking about the program, the vision of the program, how people are getting in the program, how many people are in the program. And, you know, it was almost all through referrals, not through marketing. He was giving speeches that were paid speeches and that would get people in the program. But I was like, I love this program. So why don't I just become a referrer?
As we're going through this process, I think all of us hit these mental blocks. And that's, I think, the part that kind of kills a lot of our progress towards this is we hit these mental barriers. What's the solution to that?
Be willing to be uncomfortable. The things that are greatest, asking my wife on a date, that was uncomfortable because we were close friends.
Yeah.
Doing comedy for the first time, super uncomfortable, but it was part of how I built the skill. Asking for what I want in business sometimes, or having difficult conversations, that's uncomfortable, but it clarifies and creates possibility. Asking for help, that could be uncomfortable. So like, you've got to be willing to be uncomfortable, and you've got to be resourceful. Just be resourceful. I remember it was July the 3rd of 2008. My book's coming out in August of 2008. And I just wrote what was a big check at the time, $91,000, and basically exhausted my accounts because I was going from crushing in business to getting crushed by real estate. And I made this big commitment for the book, and I was like, oh my goodness. And the cool thing about the book is 2 different people gave the book to Joe Polish. Dan Sullivan gave it to him, and another person that was knew him well, gave it to him. And so I get on the phone with him, and he just immediately, in an hour and a half, makes 3 giant connections for me. One person moved 1,000 books for me. One, I'm now the trustee of their estate. They're just really big. And he's like, hey, you should join Genius Network. It's $25K. It's in a week and a half. I was like, I'm gonna have to be super resourceful. So I remember I didn't have the cash for it. So when I got to Arizona, Leslie, who was a client of mine, said, hey, why don't you talk about killing sacred cows at this event? We have this big mansion. And I sold a bunch of books there. That got me some money. Like, I was like, what can I do to get there? What would it take? How can I didn't say I can't afford it, I don't have it. I just got resourceful. And that means that you ask for help. Ask for what you want. If I want to be on someone's podcast, if I don't ask, I'm never going to be on it.
Yeah.
And what if I get a no? Well, I'm not, you just have to be willing to hear no. Be willing to hear no. That's going to be part of the process. The people that are willing to hear no a little bit more are going to get to yeses when it comes to business. So, these are some of the key factors. And then you've just got to take action. You've got to act. And if you find yourself not wanting to act, that means you've got some personal work to do. You've got some bad beliefs from childhood, or you've got some bad experiences or mistakes that you learned the wrong lessons from.
Yeah.
And so you got to do it, and you call your shot. Like, the thing is, when I did Killing Sacred Cows, I remember I called my shot just saying, I want to hit New York Times. There's 85 people in an auditorium, and someone came up and said, if you're serious about that, I'll help you out. And they found me this guy, Michael, and Michael helped me build a marketing plan because I didn't know what I was doing, and we hit New York Times, right? And so that declaration is key. So when you declare, then you commit. Commitment means you do what it takes instead of, you don't need 2. It's so important you put 2 T's there. But you commit instead of just saying you're interested.
Yeah.
People are interested, don't act. People that are committed, act. And and things start to work in your favor.
Yeah.
Because you're doing the work. The enemy to all this is worry, because that leads to inaction and scarcity. And so you'll make mistakes, but learn from them.
So how do people get over the kind of like family beliefs, inability to act?
EMDR therapy, emotional freedom technique therapy, MDMA, somatic therapy, you just, you do the work. You go and get outside perspective, and you find out, like, timeline therapy with NLP that could help. I've done so many different modalities just to continue to uncover the layers so I can be the best version of who I am and get rid of these beliefs that don't serve me any longer and adopt something that's more aligned with prosperity. And so sometimes that could even be as simple as talking to peers or to mentors. Sometimes I talk to peers, I'm like, yeah, I had a rough month. This happened, this happened, this happened. They're like, oh, thanks for being real with me. And then they can actually, I'm not doing it to complain or be a victim or anything like that. I'm just saying, hey, this is what's really going on. And then we can brainstorm, and then they can help me out.
Yeah.
Too many people get isolated in those moments. They let that fear overcome them, and then they just escape. They get their vices. They watch too much TV. They work out too much. They, go booze too much. Whatever it is, whatever that escape is, That escape thing is actually what prevents them from what they want, because they don't go and get uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to do great things. You know, it's just part of the process. But you build the muscle, you gain the skill, you learn.